What does it mean to truly live? Not just to exist, not just to count the years, but to embrace life in all its depth, in all its fleeting beauty. Now imagine this. You are 103 years old. You have seen the world reshape itself before your eyes, wars igniting and ending, empires rising and crumbling, technology transforming what once seemed impossible into everyday reality. You have loved, lost, suffered, endured. And through it all, you have learned lessons carved into your very being, wisdom that only time and experience can teach. What if you could hear those lessons firsthand? What if you could glimpse the world through the eyes of someone who has lived through a century of change, someone who has carried both the weight of war and the lightness of laughter? Today we bring you the story of a remarkable man, a World War II veteran who has lived through history in ways most of us could never imagine. A man who spent 4 years as a prisoner of war, enduring hardships that would break many, yet emerging not with bitterness, but with a profound understanding of what it means to be alive. But this isn't just about one man's story. This is about all of us. His insights, his reflections, his hard-earned wisdom, they echo the timeless teachings of the Buddha. The truths that remind us how to navigate suffering, how to embrace impermanence, how to find peace amidst the chaos of life. Because in the end, this isn't about longevity, it's about wisdom. The kind that transcends time. The kind that reminds us how to live fully, love deeply, and let go gracefully. So if you've ever wondered what truly matters in life, if you've ever searched for meaning beyond the noise of daily existence, stay with us. Because the lessons you are about to hear may just change the way you see the world. Let's begin. Section 1. The nature of impermanence. Being 103 feels too old. The first thing our veteran tells us is simple. Being 103 feels too old. He laughs, but behind the humor lies a profound truth. In Buddhism, we often talk about anicca, impermanence. Everything changes. Our bodies, our minds, the world around us. Clinging to youth, to strength, to the way things used to be, this is a form of suffering. The Buddha once said, "Whatever is subject to origination is subject to cessation." This means that life itself is a process of constant change. The veteran acknowledges this when he says that his body no longer does what it used to, that even simple tasks take longer, and yet there is acceptance in his words. He does not fight the passage of time. He laughs at it. This is wisdom, but acceptance does not come easily. Many of us, especially in cultures that idolize youth, struggle with the idea of growing old. We chase skincare routines, fitness programs, and medical advancements, all in an attempt to defy time. We avoid the thought of aging, as if refusing to acknowledge it will somehow make it disappear. And yet, time moves forward, whether we like it or not. There is an old Zen story that illustrates this perfectly. A wise master and his student were walking through a forest when they came across an ancient tree, its bark rough and its branches twisted with age. The student sighed and said, "How sad that this tree is no longer young and strong. It has lost its beauty." The master smiled and replied, "Look closer. Do you not see how its roots have deepened, how its shade gives comfort, how its presence is a testament to the years it has stood tall? Beauty is not in youth, but in the wisdom that comes with time." This is what our veteran reminds us of. Yes, his body has changed. Yes, he moves slower than before, but there is a richness in his experience, a depth in his perspective that no youth could replace. The problem is that many people view aging as a process of losing strength, losing beauty, losing relevance. But what if we changed our perspective? What if we saw aging not as a loss, but as a transformation? The autumn leaves do not mourn their color. They blaze with fire before they fall. The ocean does not lament each retreating wave. It knows another will rise in its place. Likewise, our lives do not become less valuable with age. They take on new forms, new lessons, new meanings. The veteran's laughter in the face of time is a lesson for us all. He does not cling to the past, nor does he dwell on what he can no longer do. Instead, he focuses on what he can do. He still paints. He still builds. He still finds joy in the world around him. And that is the secret: finding beauty in the present, rather than longing for what was. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha teaches, you yourself must strive. The Buddhas only point the way. No one can escape aging, but we can choose how we respond to it. Do we fight against it, exhausting ourselves in a losing battle? Or do we, like our veteran, learn to accept, even laugh, and find peace in the ever-changing nature of life? So the next time you see a wrinkle in the mirror, or feel a little slower than you once were, take a breath, smile. This too is part of the journey, and in letting go of resistance, you might just find something unexpected: freedom. Section 2. Finding strength in adversity. Surviving war and imprisonment. At the age of 18, this man was captured by enemy forces and spent 4 years as a prisoner of war. 4 years of uncertainty, labor and suffering, and yet he survived. How Buddhism teaches us about dukkha, the unavoidable suffering that comes with life. The Buddha did not promise a life without pain, but he did teach us how to endure it with grace. In the Dhammapada, it is written, enduring patience is the highest austerity. The veteran speaks of his time in captivity, but notice what he does not do. He does not dwell in hatred. He does not speak with resentment. Instead, he acknowledges that the enemy soldiers were young men too, with their own futures stolen from them. They were still men, he says. They had all their futures before them. This is compassion. This is karuta. To see not just your own suffering, but the suffering of others, even those who have wronged you. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is freedom. But let's pause and think about what that really means. Imagine waking up each day in a prison camp, unsure if you will live to see the next sunrise. The air is thick with fear, the smell of sickness and malnutrition, a constant presence. The guards are harsh, the labor is grueling, and hope is a fragile thing, slipping through your fingers like sand. How does one not fall into hatred? How does one keep the mind from spiraling into darkness? There's an old Buddhist parable that might help us understand. 2 monks were traveling together when they came across a river. A woman stood at the edge, unable to cross. Without hesitation, the older monk lifted her onto his back and carried her across. Hours later, as they walked in silence, the younger monk finally burst out, "Why did you carry that woman? We are monks, we are not supposed to touch women." The older monk simply smiled and replied, "I put her down at the river. Why are you still carrying her?" Hatred is like this. Resentment is like this. It is a burden we choose to carry, long after the moment has passed. And yet, the veteran, after 4 years of imprisonment, chose to put it down. He understood something most of us struggle with our entire lives. The enemy is suffering too. The enemy is also human. It would have been easy for him to leave the prison camp, bitter, broken, full of rage. He had every reason to curse his captors, to relive his suffering over and over, but he didn't. Why? Because to hold on to anger is to remain imprisoned. The war had taken his freedom for 4 years. He would not let it take the rest of his life. This is something we can all learn from. We may not be prisoners of war, but we are all prisoners of something. The past, the pain others have caused us, the wounds we refuse to let heal. But the moment we choose to release it, to see the humanity in those who have hurt us, we step into our own liberation. The Buddha once said, "Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The veteran understood this. He chose not to drink the poison. He chose to live. So what about you? What pain are you still carrying? What anger is weighing you down? If a man who suffered 4 years of captivity can learn to let go, perhaps we can too. And in doing so, we might just discover that the key to our own prison cell has been in our hands all along. Section 3. The illusion of control, luck, and accidents. When asked how he has lived so long, the veteran laughs. It's just luck, he says. The accident of birth, the accident of not having accidents. At first glance, his words seem to diminish the role of effort, resilience, or even wisdom in survival. But if we look deeper, we find something profoundly aligned with a core Buddhist teaching, anatta, or non-self. So much of life is beyond our control. We spend our days meticulously planning, preparing, and securing our futures, believing that if we just do everything right, we can mold life to our will. But then a sudden illness, an unexpected tragedy, an economic downturn, and everything changes in an instant. The illusion shatters, and we are left grasping, wondering why things didn't go according to plan. This is where suffering begins, not in the event itself, but in our resistance to it. There's an old Zen story about a farmer who lived in a small village. One day, his only horse ran away. His neighbors lamented, "What bad luck." But the farmer simply said, "Maybe." A few days later, the horse returned, bringing with it a group of wild horses. His neighbors rejoiced. "What good fortune." But again the farmer said, "Maybe." Soon after, his son tried to ride one of the wild horses, was thrown off, and broke his leg. "Such terrible luck," the neighbors cried. The farmer, "Maybe." A week later, the army came to the village, conscripting all the able-bodied young men. The farmer's son, with his broken leg, was spared. Such good luck. The farmer only smiled. "Maybe." This story reminds us that what we perceive as good or bad luck is often just a moment in a much larger unfolding. What feels like misfortune today may be the very thing that saves us tomorrow. The veteran, at 103, understands this. He no longer wastes energy trying to control what cannot be controlled. He simply lives. But what does this mean for us? Does it mean we should stop striving, stop planning, stop caring about outcomes? Not at all. It means we must approach life with mindfulness, engaging fully, yet without attachment. The Buddha taught, "Do your best, then let go." In other words, plant the seed, tend to the soil, water the plant, but do not demand that the tree grow on your timeline or in the shape you desire. The veteran's survival was shaped by factors beyond his control: where he was born, what circumstances he faced, even the random chance of not stepping in the wrong place at the wrong time. But here's the key: instead of resenting the uncertainty of life, he accepts it. So often, we resist change. We cling to certainty. We want guarantees. But guarantees do not exist. What exists is now. This moment, this breath, this experience. The veteran has lived for over a century, not by wrestling life into submission, but by flowing with it. He moves with the currents rather than against them, and in doing so, he has found something more valuable than control: peace. So the next time life takes an unexpected turn, ask yourself, am I resisting, or am I allowing? Am I grasping, or am I flowing? Because in the end, it is not control that keeps us afloat, it is surrender. Section 4. The power of a simple life. Happiness comes from interest. Despite his age, this man still paints, still builds furniture, still learns. Having an interest in life is what keeps you going, he says. And this is exactly what the Buddha taught. We often think happiness comes from achievement, from wealth, from status. Society tells us that success is measured in numbers, bank balances, awards, followers. But how many people have climbed the highest peaks of status only to find that the view is empty? Buddhism reminds us that joy comes from sati, mindful presence. When we engage with the world, not to prove something, but simply to experience it, we find a deeper satisfaction. The veteran doesn't paint for recognition. He paints because he enjoys it. The act itself is enough. This reminds me of the story of the man who planted trees. An old man near the end of his life spent his days carefully planting seeds. A traveler passed by and asked, "Why are you planting these trees? You are too old to ever sit in their shade." The old man smiled and said, "Others planted trees before me so that I could enjoy their shade. Now, I plant for those who come after." He found joy in the act itself, not in the reward. So often, we chase happiness in the wrong places. We believe it is something to be earned, something waiting for us after we accomplish enough. We push through work, tell ourselves just a little more, then I'll be happy. But happiness is not at the finish line. It is in the steps we take every day. The veteran understands this. He does not wait for life to bring him joy. He creates it in the simple act of doing. He builds furniture not because he needs to, but because shaping wood with his hands brings him a quiet peace. He learns not because he must prove anything, but because curiosity is its own reward. How many of us overlook the simple joys right in front of us? The sound of birds in the morning, the warmth of a cup of tea, the way light dances on the surface of water. In our rush to chase the big moments, we forget that life is made up of small ones. The Buddha once told his followers, "When walking, walk. When eating, eat." At first, this sounds obvious, but think about how often we eat while scrolling our phones, walk while lost in thought, work while wishing we were somewhere else. We are always half living. But joy comes when we fully show up. If we stopped for a moment, if we engaged in simple joys with full presence, perhaps we would find that happiness was never far away. It was always here, waiting for us to notice it. Section 5. Love, Loss, and Letting Go. The Regrets of a Stoic Man. Perhaps the most heartbreaking moment in this conversation is when the veteran speaks about his emotions. "I was never able to show emotions," he says. "I regret that." There is a pause, a silence heavy with memories, with things left unsaid. He explains that his time in the war taught him to suppress emotion, to survive, to endure. When you are surrounded by suffering, by the daily possibility of death, emotions become dangerous. You do not cry. You do not show weakness. You build walls brick by brick until nothing can get in. And while this helped him in captivity, it later became a barrier to deep relationships. "My wife was wonderful," he says, his voice quieter now. "She was patient. She understood. But still, I know I hurt her." The weight of 100 unsaid "I love yous" lingers in his voice. "I regret that." In Buddhism, attachment is often discussed as a cause of suffering. But detachment does not mean suppression. It does not mean shutting down or turning away. Metta, or loving kindness, teaches us to open our hearts, not close them, to love without fear, to feel without being consumed. The veteran's regret reminds us that strength is not found in shutting down, but in staying open, even to pain. There's an old Buddhist story about a man who carried a stone in his pocket for 40 years. As a child, he had been hurt by a harsh word, a betrayal, a loss, and so he picked up a stone and vowed never to feel such pain again. Whenever he felt emotions rising, he squeezed the stone, reminding himself to stay strong, to stay distant. One day, an old monk saw him rubbing the stone in his hand and asked, "Why do you carry that?" The man explained. The monk nodded and said, "Ah, but if you keep your hands closed around that stone, how will you ever hold love?" The veteran's life is proof of this paradox. He endured, he survived, but in keeping his heart guarded, he also kept himself from fully experiencing the love around him. His regret is not for what he lost, but for what he never allowed himself to fully feel. But here's the thing about regret. It is not the end of the story. In Buddhism, we talk about letting go, not as an act of forgetting, but as an act of releasing the chains of the past. The veteran cannot go back in time. He cannot change the words left unsaid, but he can, even at 103, learn to soften. He can share his wisdom, his truth, his love now, in whatever way he can. So what about us? How often do we hold back, out of fear of being vulnerable? How often do we keep emotions locked away, thinking we are protecting ourselves, when in reality, we are only building walls around our own joy? The veteran's story is a reminder, love is not weakness. Expressing our emotions is not a burden, it is a gift. If we wait too long, we may find ourselves, like him, looking back with regret. But if we learn to let go of fear, of hesitation, of the need to always be strong, we may find that love was always waiting, just beyond the walls we built. So say the words, give the hug, feel deeply, because strength is not in holding back. Strength is in letting go. Conclusion: what this means for us. So, what can we take from all of this? What does a 103-year-old war veteran, viewed through the lens of Buddhist wisdom, teach us about life? First, accept impermanence. Aging is natural. Everything changes. The body, the mind, the world around us. Fighting against the inevitable only creates suffering. But when we embrace impermanence, we find peace in the flow of life, rather than clinging to what was. Second, endure suffering with patience. Pain is unavoidable. Loss, hardship, and disappointment are all part of this human experience. But how we respond, that is our choice. Do we resist, making our suffering heavier, or do we meet it with patience, with grace, with the understanding that even suffering too shall pass? Third, let go of control. The veteran lived long enough to understand that life is unpredictable. We make plans, we build expectations, but in the end, life unfolds in its own way. The more we try to control it, the more frustrated we become. Instead of grasping, we must learn to be present, to accept that while we may not have control, we do have a choice to live fully in the moment, right here, right now. Fourth, find joy in simplicity. A handmade table, a brushstroke on a canvas, a quiet walk at sunset. We don't need grand achievements or external validation to experience happiness. True joy is found in the smallest moments, when we are fully present with life itself. Fifth, love fully. The veteran's greatest regret was not expressing his emotions, not opening his heart. And yet, love is the most beautiful and natural part of being human. If we let fear, pride, or past wounds keep us from loving deeply, we may reach the end of our lives, wishing we had lived differently. Let this be a reminder. Say what needs to be said. Give the hug. Let love flow freely. And finally, as our veteran wisely says, have a sense of humor, even in suffering, even in old age, even in the face of uncertainty. Laugh, because life in all its messiness is still a gift. So as you go about your day, take a moment to reflect. What is one thing you can do today to live with more presence, more compassion, and more acceptance? Maybe it's letting go of something you can't control. Maybe it's taking a moment to appreciate a small, quiet joy. Maybe it's telling someone you love them while you still have the chance. If this message resonated with you, if you found even a flicker of wisdom in these words, then let's keep this journey going together. Subscribe to Quiet Wisdom and join a community of seekers, people who, like you, are looking for meaning, for peace, for a way to navigate this beautiful, impermanent life with grace. And if you found something valuable in this story, share it, because wisdom, like love, is meant to be given freely. Thank you for watching. May you live each day with mindfulness, love, and peace.